Little girl found her grandmother lying inside a wheelbarrow outside her father's mansion. The hopeful sun. The sun on the day of Namdi's wedding was a blessing, so fierce and golden it seemed heaven itself approved. It beat down on the red earth of the village compound, glinting off the beads of sweat on the brows of dancing uncles and catching in the sequins of the celebratory George rappers. The air thrummed with the high-life guitar from the live band, a sound so joyous it felt like a second heartbeat. At the center of it all stood Namdi, 22 years old, his heart swollen with a love so profound it scared him a little. His new ISI Egu cap sat proudly on his head, the embroidered lions seeming to smile. Beside him, swathed in brilliant blue lace and a smile of serene wonder, was Igioma, his wife. The words were still new and magical on his tongue, but amidst the whirl of well-wishers, one figure was his true north. His mother, Chinyere. She sat on a high-backed chair near the small podium, a queen holding court. She was not a tall woman, but her presence commanded the space around her. Her lace, a rich burgundy, was immaculate. Her smile was wide, genuine, yet to Namdi's expertly attuned eye, it held a weight, a profound focus that went beyond the day's celebration. As the ritualized spraying of money subsided, she beckoned him with a slight tilt of her chin. He excused himself from a laughing cousin and went to her, bending low so she could speak into his ear, her familiar scent of camwood and pear's soap enveloping him. "Naam," she began, her voice thick with emotion. She took his face in her hands, her palms rough from a lifetime of work, yet infinitely gentle. She looked deep into his eyes, past the young man in fine attire, and saw the little boy she had carried through fever and famine. "You have made me proud today. You have brought a good girl into our family." "Thank you, Mama," he said, his own voice catching. Her thumb stroked his cheeks. "Now, listen to me," she continued, her tone dropping, becoming more intense, a prayer and a mandate woven together. A man plants a yam not just for the beauty of the vine, but for the fullness of the tuber. You have brought a beautiful vine home. Now let it bear fruit. Her gaze was unwavering, filled with a desperate hope that shook him. "May God bless your wife's womb. May it be fertile ground. Let her conceive quickly. Let me hold my grandson in these arms before the strength leaves them completely. Let me see the future of this family, the one who will carry your father's name forward." She squeezed his face, and in that moment, Namdi felt the immense, invisible burden of being an only son settle squarely on his shoulders. It was not just his joy she celebrated. It was his potential to continue a line that hung by the single, fragile thread of his life. He saw, for a fleeting second, the ghost of his quiet father in her eyes, and the loneliness of her years as a widow in the set of her jaw. The music swelled again, and she released him, her smile returning, but the echo of her words lingered in the air between them, a silent, urgent counterpoint to the wedding drums. As he walked back to his beaming bride, the weight of his mother's hope sat in his stomach, a stone of love and duty, tempering his unbridled joy with the solemn understanding that for her, this wedding was not an end, but a very specific beginning. The true test, the true blessing she awaited, was still to come. He took Igioma's hand, its warmth a comfort, and pulled her into the dance, trying to lose himself in the rhythm, even as his mother's fervent prayer for a son echoed in the chambers of his heart. The small apartment in Port Harcourt was a world away from the dusty, sprawling compound of the wedding. Here, the air smelled of wet concrete from the recent rains and the faint, greasy scent of akara from the street vendor below, not of roasting meat and earth. For Namdi and Igioma, it was their sanctuary, a blank page eagerly awaiting their story. The first month was a honeymoon of discovery, learning the rhythms of each other's mornings, the way Igioma hummed gospel songs while sweeping, the face Namdi made when concentrating on tightening a leaky tap. They painted one wall a cheerful yellow, bought a second-hand fridge that hummed like a tired bee, and felt like monarchs of their own tiny, perfect kingdom. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as the purple haze of dusk settled over the city. Namdi was still in his work clothes, loosening his tie. Igioma was at the two-burner stove, stirring a pot of stew. The phone's ring was shrill, an intrusion. "Namdi, Naam, good evening." His mother's voice was bright, crackling slightly over the poor line. "How is Port Harcourt treating you?" "It is treating us well, Mama. We are managing," Namdi replied, smiling at Igioma, who turned, wooden spoon in hand, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. Good, good. And your wife? How is she? The question was casual, but there was a particular emphasis on the she that Namdi, trained by a lifetime of listening, caught immediately. She is fine, Mama. Right here, cooking. Do you want to speak with her? Yes, yes, let me greet her. Igioma took the receiver, wiping her hand on her wrapper. Good evening, Mama. How is your body? My body is listening to me, Nwam. Chinyur said, her tone softening. But it is not my body I am calling about. I am calling about yours. How are you feeling? Is everything normal? Igioma's smile tightened at the edges. She met Namdi's gaze across the room. I am feeling very fine, Mama. No problems. ODMMA, Chinyur said, but the words sounded less like a conclusion and more like a pause. Just make sure you are eating well. Palm oil, egusi, things that build blood. You need to be strong. The call ended with blessings, but a new, subtle thread had been woven into the fabric of their new life. It was the thread of expectation. The calls became a weekly ritual, as regular as Sunday service. Sometimes they came on Wednesday mornings, sometimes Saturday afternoons. The opening was always the same. Inquiries about work, the cost of Gary, the neighbors. But the conversation, like a river finding its course, always wound its way to the same destination. Namdi, any news yet? She would ask, her voice dropping to a hopeful whisper, as if the news itself were a shy creature that might be startled away. Not yet, Mama. God's time is the best, he would repeat, a mantra that began to feel thin with use. I know, she'd sigh, a sound that carried across the miles, heavy with the ticking of an invisible clock. But you are young and strong. There is no need to delay. A house is not a home without the cry of a child. Your father, may he rest, he was so proud the day I told him I was carrying you. She would then launch into stories of her own youth, of effortless fertility, of how she knew she was pregnant with Namdi because she dreamed of a mighty river. The subtext was a blueprint, a pressure applied with the soft, relentless force of love. Igioma began to dread the ring of the phone. She would sometimes let Namdi answer it, busying herself in the bedroom, her heart beating a little faster. The questions, though never unkind, made her feel like a vessel under inspection, her worth quietly being tied to a function she had not yet performed. One evening, after a particularly pointed call where Chinyur had suggested a special herbal bath from a woman in her village, Igioma broke the silence that had settled over their dinner of rice and beans. Does she think I am not trying? Igioma's voice was small, her eyes fixed on her plate. Or that there is something wrong with me? Namdi reached across the table, covering her hand with his. There is nothing wrong with you. You are perfect. Mama. Mama just has a great hope. It comes from a place of love. Her world has been small for so long. I am her only project. But I am not a project, Igioma whispered, a tear escaping down her cheek. I am a person. We are a we, not just a means to a grandson. Namdi moved his chair to hold her, feeling the tension in her shoulders. He kissed her temple. I know. And we will have our family, in our own time. Her hope is her burden to carry, not yours to fulfill. But as he held his wife, Namdi felt the dual pull of his loyalties, to the woman in his arms whose heart was his home, and to the woman whose voice on the phone carried the echoes of past sacrifices and future dreams. The phone, that simple black plastic object, had become an altar where familial duty clashed with nascent marital peace. And the weekly question, any news? Hung in the air of their yellow-walled sanctuary, a persistent, loving, and exhausting echo, reminding them that their marriage was not just their own. The seasons turned in their Port Harcourt sanctuary, marked not by weather but by the slow, steady rhythm of waiting. Chinyur's calls were the punctuation in their weeks. The hopeful question, any news, had become a familiar landscape, a hill they climbed together each time, Namdi offering the same patient, not yet, Mama. Then, one humid morning, the world shifted on its axis. Igioma, her face pale and her hands trembling, emerged from their tiny bathroom clutching a small plastic stick. She didn't need to speak. The look in her eyes, a terrifying, exhilarating cocktail of disbelief and awe, said everything. Namdi's knees went weak. He pulled her to him, and they stood, locked in a silent, shaking embrace in the middle of their sitting room, the only sound the distant cry of a Okada horn. The first person he had to call was his mother. As he dialed, his finger fumbling on the rotary, he felt the weight of her hope, her years of prayer, pressing on the receiver. He desperately wished he could hand her the son she dreamed of, a perfect fulfillment. Namdi, her voice, sharp with immediate concern. Is everything all right? Mama, he began, his voice thick. We have news. A sharp intake of breath. Kidu? Tell me. Igioma. She is pregnant. We are going to have a child. The silence that followed was not the joyful eruption he'd imagined. It was a profound, hollow void on the line, stretching for 3, 4, 5 seconds. In that silence, he heard everything. The recalculation, the adjustment of a deeply held vision, the quiet, internal whisper of girl or boy that she would never voice but that he knew was there. Then, her voice returned, painted over with a bright, determined enthusiasm. Ah, omimame. Wonderful news. Chinik Igozi. God has answered. The relief in her tone was genuine, but it was relief that the drought had ended, not necessarily delight at the specific type of rain. A child is a blessing from God. A daughter is a special blessing. She will care for you in your old age. The proverbs came quickly, a rehearsed litany for such an occasion. But Namdi heard the slight, almost imperceptible flatness beneath the praise. The dream of a little boy, a miniature Namdi to carry his father's name, had been so vivid for her that its dissipation left a brief, visible shadow. I am coming, she declared, the steel back in her voice. I will be on the next bus. She must not lift a heavy pot. She must rest. I am coming right now. True to her word, Chinyir arrived the following afternoon, a whirlwind of practicality and suppressed emotion. Her focus was immediately on Igioma, now positioned as the precious vessel. She took over the kitchen, brewing pungent, herbal teas for strength and frying plantains until the apartment was hazy with smoke. She scrutinized Igioma's posture, her diet, her rest. But when Igioma napped, Chinyir would sit in the yellow-painted living room, her hands resting on her own abdomen, her gaze far away. Namdi saw at once that unguarded moment of wistfulness. It wasn't disappointment in the life growing within his wife. It was the quiet mourning of a parallel future, a ghost grandson she had already loved in her heart. The pregnancy progressed. Igioma bloomed, her cheeks rounding, her spirit softening under the physical reality of motherhood. Chinyir's initial briskness began to thaw, especially when she felt the first frantic flutter of the baby's kick beneath her palm during an evening prayer. Her eyes had widened, and for a moment, pure, unadulterated wonder broke through the layer of duty. The labor was long and difficult. Namdi paced the hospital corridor, his mother sitting rigidly on a plastic chair, her lips moving in silent, furious prayer. When the sharp, healthy cry finally pierced the air, it was a sound that sliced through every preconception, every silent hope. It was a strong, musical wail. The midwife emerged, beaming. Congratulations. You have a beautiful, very strong daughter. Namdi's heart surged with a love so fierce it stole his breath. He looked immediately at his mother. Chinyir had closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing a final, gentle blow. Then she opened them, stood up, and squared her shoulders. The matriarch had arrived. Let me see her, she said, and her voice was steady. Let me see my granddaughter. In the hospital room, under the stark fluorescent light, she looked at the tiny, squalling bundle with a face like a scrubbed potato, a furious little fist punching the air. Igioma, exhausted and radiant, watched her mother-in-law's face with nervous eyes. Chinyir reached out, her work-roughened finger tracing the impossibly soft curve of the baby's cheek. The baby's cries hitched, then quieted into a whimper. A long moment passed. Then, a single, surprising tear escaped from the corner of Chinyir's eye, tracing a path through the powder on her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, but of surrender, to a love that was now undeniable, immediate, and bigger than any dream. Ada M., she whispered, her voice breaking. My daughter, Ifyinanya M., my love. She looked at Igioma, and for the first time, her gaze held no agenda, only shared, awestruck exhaustion. You have done well. You have given us life. What will you call her? Igioma, relief flooding her, smiled. Adayabi, she who comes from the heart. Chinyir nodded slowly, repeating the name as she lifted the baby carefully into her arms. Adayabi, yes, you have come from the heart. and you have captured mine." She held the child close, and in that embrace, the ghost of the unborn grandson finally faded, replaced by the warm, breathing, perfectly real weight of her granddaughter. The future had arrived, wearing a different face than she'd expected, but its cry was just as powerful, its claim on her heart just as absolute. Chinyur's transformation from a voice on the telephone to a physical force in their small apartment was instantaneous and total. She arrived not as a guest, but as a commander taking charge of a critical operation. Her love for Adaobi was not a gentle stream. It was a river in flood, sweeping away all hesitation and rearranging the landscape of their home. The first thing to be conquered was the kitchen. Out went Igioma's modest pots, and came Chinyur's heavy, blackened Ororo pot, seasoned by decades of use. The air, once smelling of mild seasoning and Igioma's careful experiments, grew thick and potent with the aroma of Yuzaisa seeds roasting, ajari paste, and gallons of palm oil. "She is nursing," Chinyur would declare, stirring a viscous, pepper-red Igioma, often relegated to the armchair with a bowl of this fiery concoction, would eat obediently, tears streaming down her cheeks from the heat, while Chinyur watched with satisfaction. "Good, good. See, it is entering your blood." Her expertise with the baby was undeniable, a practiced art. She could bathe the wriggling, slippery Adaobi in a plastic basin with one confident hand, supporting her head with a gentle but unshakable grip, humming old Igbo songs all the while. She swaddled her so perfectly the baby looked like a neat, contented cocoon, her cries ceasing almost magically. She had a remedy for everything. A special leaf rubbed on the gums for fussiness, a warm compress for a gassy belly, a specific way to rock that involved a deep, swaying motion from her hips. "My mother showed me this," she'd say, her voice taking on a rare, soft pride. "And her mother before her. This is how we have always done it." But Igioma, watching from the periphery with the keen, slightly anxious eyes of a new mother, began to see past the formidable competence. She saw the winces her mother-in-law tried to hide, the sharp intake of breath when she straightened up from the bathing basin, the way her hand would fly to the small of her back and press hard after standing at the stove for just a few minutes. She observed the careful, deliberate way Chinyur lowered herself into a chair, as if her joints were made of brittle glass. One afternoon, Igioma ventured to the neighborhood well to fetch a small bucket of water. Chinyur insisted on accompanying her, to get some sun for the baby. The distance was short, not 200 meters, but it became a pilgrimage of pauses. Chinyur, with a Adaobi snug against her chest in a wrapper, would walk for a minute, then stop, leaning against a compound wall or a parked car, feigning interest in a plant or the sky. "This sun is strong today," she'd comment, breathing a little heavily. "Let me carry her, Mama." Igioma offered the third time they stopped. "Nonsense," Chinyur dismissed, her pride of visible armor. "A grandmother's embrace is the best for a child. It is steady," but the stiffness in her neck betrayed her. Back home, Igioma watched as Chinyur sank into her designated armchair with a soft, relieved sigh that seemed to come from the very marrow of her bones. For a long moment, she just sat, eyes closed, letting the pain subside. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, her eyes snapped open, and she reached for the crying baby. "Give her to me. She knows her grandmother is here." The duality was constant. The undeniable, self-sacrificing love, and the equally undeniable, unspoken pain. Chinyur's arthritis was the silent third resident in the apartment, a presence that dictated the pace of her heroism. She would spend an hour painstakingly peeling vegetables for soup, her fingers moving slowly, methodically, while seated. But the moment Adaobi fussed, she would rise, pain forgotten, to pace the room. She loved fiercely, but her love was often framed in the future tense, a future that still held the shape of her original dream. She would bounce Adaobi on her aching knee and murmur, "You are beautiful, my daughter. You will be a wonderful elder sister. You will help your brother when he comes." The words were casual, but they landed on Igioma's heart with a small, familiar weight. Even in this cocoon of grandmotherly devotion, the expectation lingered, a path already being cleared for an imagined son. Yet, in the quiet moments, something purer shone through. Igioma would sometimes wake in the deep night for a feeding and find Chinyur already awake, seated in the dim light of a kerosene lamp, simply staring at the sleeping infant's face. In those moments, her face was unguarded, stripped of its practical severity and ancestral longing. It held only a kind of raw, wondering devotion. She would trace the curve of a Dayabe's eyebrow with a single, tender finger, a gesture so intimate it brought a lump to Igioma's throat. Chinyere was a hurricane of tradition, pain, and potent love, reshaping their world. She was teaching them how to care for a child, but she was also, silently, teaching them the cost of her own strength. Igioma began to understand that every perfect swaddle, every pot of strength-building soup, was an act of will, a victory of love over the quiet rebellion of her own body. The apartment was warm, full of life and spice and song, but it also hummed with the unspoken tension of a woman trying to outrun her physical limits for the sake of a legacy now sleeping, peaceful and oblivious, in her arms. The apartment became a stage where a complex, silent play unfolded daily. Its acts were the rituals of care, the bathing, the feeding, the lullabies. Its themes were love, legacy, and the quiet friction between them. Chinyere's devotion to a Dayabe was the engine of the household. She had established a regime of perfect order. The baby's cloth nappies were boiled, sun-bleached, and folded with military precision. Her feeding times were sacred, her sleep schedule enforced with gentle but ironclad certainty. Igioma watched, learned, and felt a gnawing sense of irrelevance. Her own tentative motions, the way she held a Dayabe a little less confidently, her uncertainty about the exact consistency of pap, were met with a kind, yet firm, correction. No, Nwam, like this, Chinyere would say, taking the crying baby and demonstrating the exact angle of the bottle. You see? She takes it better. A mother must be firm, like a tree. The child is the vine. She needs something strong to cling to. The proverbs, Igioma began to notice, were often about strength, foundation, and continuity. They were beautiful, ancient wisdom, but they often carried a subtle payload. One evening, as Chinyere rocked a drowsy Dayabe, she began a story. There was a great hunter in our village, she murmured, her voice a low, rhythmic chant. He had a sharp spear and a keen eye. But his greatest pride was not the bushmeat he brought home. It was his son, who walked behind him, carrying his quiver. The son learned the paths, the sounds of the forest. When the hunter grew old and his eyes dimmed, the son led the way, and the family never knew hunger. She kissed Adayabe's forehead. This is the way of things. One hand washes the other, and together they wash the face. You, my flower, will be a good helper. You will carry the quiver for your brother. Igioma, mending a tear in Namdi's work shirt, felt the needle prick her finger. She sucked the small bead of blood, the metallic taste sharp on her tongue. The story wasn't just a lullaby. It was a blueprint, gently inserted into the baby's dreams. Adayabe's future role was already being written. The supportive sister, the keeper of the way for the more important son yet to come. The love in Chinyere's voice was real, but its shape was predetermined. Namdi felt the strain in a different way. He was caught in a loyalties. His mother's presence was a gift, her labor a sacrifice he could never repay. He saw her pain in the mornings, the way she would grip the edge of the table to push herself up, her jaw tight. He heard her soft groans from her room at night. Yet, to question her was to insult her sacrifice. At the same time, he saw the light dimming slightly in Igioma's eyes, the way she deferred to his mother in all things baby-related, her own maternal confidence stifled. He tried to bridge the gap. Mama, let Igioma bathe her today. You rest your hands. Chinyere would wave him off. And do what? Sit like a log. My hands have bathed more babies than the river has seen fish. They are fine. Or he would put an arm around Igioma at night and whisper, she means well. Her world is just smaller than ours. Is it? Igioma would whisper back, her voice thick in the darkness. Or is she trying to make our world fit into hers? After 6 months, the seasons in Port Harcourt changed. The rains became heavier, the humidity a damp blanket. Chinyere's arthritis flared with a vengeance. The walk to the well became an impossible ordeal. One morning, Igioma found her frozen in the middle of the living room, her body locked in a spasm of pain, tears of frustration and agony streaming silently down her face as she clutched the back of a chair. It was the unspoken truth, screaming in the silent rigidity of her body. She could no longer outrun it. That evening, she made her announcement. I will go back to the village at the end of the week. Namdi and Ijeoma protested instantly, a chorus of genuine dismay. Mama, no. You are a help to us. Adeobi needs you. Chinyere held up a hand, her expression resigned but proud. You are both capable now. You have learned. A chick does not stay under the mother hen forever, or it will never learn to scratch for its own worms. She looked at Adeobi, who was gumming a wooden rattle. Her eyes glistened. My work here is paused. The village air is better for my bones. And you, she said, looking at them both, need to be a family. Your own family. The words were wise, but they hung in the air, charged with ambiguity. Did she mean they needed space to grow? Or was she withdrawing, a general retreating because the battle for a particular outcome was too physically costly to wage on foreign soil? The day of her departure was filled with a prickly silence. Chinyere held Adeobi for a long, long time, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her weight. She gave Ijeoma a final, thorough list of instructions, the exact leaf for teething pain, the proper song for a restless night. Then she turned to her son. Her voice was low, for his ears only. You have a beautiful daughter, Namdi, a first fruit, but a tree does not bear only one fruit. Remember the hunter. Remember the quiver. She touched his cheek, her meaning clear. The mission was merely deferred, not abandoned. As the bus pulled away, a strange mix of emotions settled over the apartment. There was relief, the palpable easing of a subtle, constant pressure. There was emptiness. The silence where Chinyere's songs and firm directions had been was vast. And there was a new, fragile space, now filled only by the three of them. Ijeoma picked up Adeobi, holding her without hesitation, finding her own rhythm for the first time. Namdi put his arms around them both, feeling the structure of his world recalibrate. The unspoken strain had left with the bus, but its echo remained in the quiet, in the way Ijeoma sometimes still glanced towards the empty armchair before choosing how to soothe her child. They were alone, finally a nucleus, but the ghost of a blueprint, of a brother, a quiver, a specific future, lingered in the corners of their yellow-walled sanctuary, a whisper not easily forgotten. A December tradition. The quiet that followed Chinyere's departure was profound. For a week, the apartment felt too large, its sounds hollow and unfamiliar. Ijeoma's hesitant lullabies replaced her mother-in-law's resonant chants. Namdi fumbled with cloth nappies, his large hands clumsy compared to Chinyere's efficient motions. They were learning to be a trio, their rhythm unsteady but theirs alone. Then, as the Harmattan haze began to bleach the Port Harcourt sky in late November, the first letter arrived. It was on thin, blue airmail paper, Chinyere's spidery, formal script covering every centimeter. My dear son and daughter, I pray this letter meets you in good health. The village is quiet. The rains have stopped and the dust is settling. My bones are listening to the dry air. It is a stubborn conversation, but we are managing. How is my Adeobi? Has she grown? Does she smile now? Tell her grandmother dreams of her laugh. I am preparing a few things for my visit in December. The ugu in my garden is thriving. I will bring some. Until then, walk well. The letter was a lifeline, a reassurance that the connection, though stretched, was unbroken. It held no questions about future pregnancies, only a hungry focus on the child that was. Ijeoma read it 3 times, her finger tracing the words about dreams and laughter. A tiny knot of anxiety she hadn't fully acknowledged began to loosen. December arrived on a wave of scorching sun and peppery, festive anticipation. On the morning of the 15th, a taxi honked outside the blue gate. Adeobi, now 1, was tottering on unsteady legs. She pointed a chubby finger at the door, babbling. Chinyere emerged from the taxi like a queen arriving for a coronation. She was dressed in a crisp, navy blue wrapper and blouse, a matching head tie tied regally. Her face broke into a smile that erased months of distance. But it was the things that followed her that truly announced her arrival. A large, woven basket overflowing with dark green ugu leaves and glossy peppers. A sack of new yams, their skins like brown velvet. A smaller bag that clinked promisingly with bottles of homemade palm wine and peanut oil. And for Adeobi, a handcrafted wooden pull toy, a bird with wheels, painted in bright yellows and reds. Grandma, Ijeoma breathed, and the title felt natural, warm. Chinyur swept Adaobi into her arms, ignoring the stiffness the motion clearly caused. "Nnem, my mother. Look at you. Walking." She covered the child's face with kisses, and Adaobi, after a moment of wide-eyed surprise, erupted in gurgling laughter. The very sound Chinyur had written off. That visit set a pattern, a ritual as dependable as the turning of the year. Every December, Chinyur would arrive, each time a little slower, leaning more heavily on her walking stick, but each time her luggage bursting with the essence of home. The gifts were not mere presents. They were tactile love letters. There were hand-sewn dresses with intricate embroidery for Adaobi, each one slightly larger than the last. There were special spices Ijeoma could not find in the Port Harcourt markets. There were stories, not just of hunters and quivers now, but of mischievous tortoises and wise elephants, told to a captivated Adaobi by the glow of Christmas lights. For Adaobi, Grandma's December arrival was Christmas. The scent of the village on her clothes, wood smoke, dried herbs, and earth became the scent of magic. The rustle of the new Ankara fabrics was the sound of celebration. Chinyur, in these moments, was not the taskmaster of infancy, but a fount of pure, undiluted adoration. She would sit for hours, her aching legs stretched out, while Adaobi draped her with paper chains or read to her from picture books. The pressure of expectation seemed to melt away in the December sun. Chinyur would watch her granddaughter with an expression of pure, serene contentment. The old proverbs about brothers and quivers were replaced with affirmations for the child before her. "You are so clever, Adaobi. See how you fix that toy? You will be an engineer." Or, "Your voice is so sweet when you sing. You will be a star." Namdi and Ijeoma watched this annual transformation with relief and gratitude. It was as if the distance and the defined duration of the visit allowed Chinyur to simply be grandma, not the architect of legacy. Her love could be extravagant, focused, and free of agenda. One Christmas Eve, when Adaobi was 3, she fell asleep on Chinyur's lap after a long day of excitement. Ijeoma moved to take her to bed, but Chinyur shook her head gently. "Let her sleep," she whispered, her hand stroking the child's braids. "The weight of a sleeping child is the weight of the world's peace. You don't disturb it." Ijeoma sat beside her, watching them. In the soft light, she saw the deep lines on Chinyur's face, etched by pain and years, but all of them softened now by tenderness. The unspoken strain of the early days had been woven into something new, a tradition, a sacred, yearly pilgrimage of the heart where Chinyur poured all her deferred daily love into one concentrated, glorious month. It was a truce, a beautiful, fragile understanding that this joyful, present love was enough. For now, in the glow of December, it was everything. The Christmas Eve urge. The December Adaobi turned 4 arrived with a peculiar, frantic energy. The harmattan wind was a constant, dry whisper, stripping leaves from the guava tree in the compound and coating the blue gate in a fine, red film. Inside the bungalow, the air crackled with a different kind of electricity. Preparations were in full, glorious chaos. Namdi was a tangle of limbs and frustration in the corner of the sitting room, wrestling with a knotted string of Christmas lights that seemed to have a malevolent will of its own. "Who designed this?" he muttered, his brow furrowed. "It's a conspiracy against peace." From the kitchen came the steady, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of Ijeoma's pestle against mortar, pounding yam for tomorrow's feast. The rich, starchy scent filled the house, mingling with the sharper aroma of onions and tomatoes frying. She moved with a focused grace, her wrapper knotted securely at her waist, a light sheen of sweat on her forehead. And in her throne, the padded armchair by the window where the morning sun pooled, sat Chinyur. She had arrived 2 days prior, her journey etched more deeply into her movements this year. Her walking stick was now a constant companion, leaning against the chair like a scepter. She watched the domestic whirlwind with a mixture of profound love and a growing, gnawing frustration. Her hands, resting on her lap, felt useless. They yearned to knead dough, to sort beans, to stir the bubbling pots. Instead, they were folded idle. Every instruction she offered felt hollow from the comfort of her chair. "Amara, don't forget a little scent leaf in the stew," she called out. "Yes, Mama." Ijeoma's voice came back, patient. "Namdi, that bulb there is flickering. Check the connection." "I'm on it, Mama." She was the general, but she was directing the battle from a tent far from the front lines. The dissonance was a physical ache, rivaling the one in her knees. Here she was, the matriarch, the provider, the one who had single-handedly managed seasons of planting and harvesting, yet she was reduced to a spectator in her own son's home. The urge to contribute with her own hands, to feel the gritty reality of preparation beneath her fingers, became a tide rising in her chest. A deity, a whirlwind in a red Christmas dress, zipped past her chair, a paper angel in her hand. "Grandma, look, I made a flying angel." Chinyer's heart squeezed. It is beautiful, N.E.M. Just beautiful. But the praise felt insufficient. She wanted to be the one cutting the paper, guiding the small hands, not just admiring the finished product. Her eyes fell on the shopping list tucked under a magnet on the fridge door. It was a mundane thing. Tomatoes, peppers, onions, fresh fish, beef, stock cubes. Yet, to her, it represented a mission, a tangible, necessary contribution, an act that would prove she was still vital, not an ornament to be cared for. When Igioma emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, Chinyer seized her moment. Her voice was calm, but it carried the unmistakable tone of a decree. "Igioma, give me the market list." Igioma paused, blinking. "Mama, the list. For the market. Let me go? You have enough to do here with the pounding and the cooking. The yam alone is a mountain. Let me go and get the remaining things." Igioma's face softened into concern. "Mama, please no. The market on Christmas Eve? It's a madhouse. Everyone and their grandmother is there. Your legs the crowd. My legs know the way to a market." Chinyer retorted, her pride stung. She gripped the arms of her chair, preparing to rise, a declaration of her capability. "I have navigated markets more crowded than this when I was carrying Namdi on my back. I am not made of glass. I will go, I will buy what we need, and I will return. Let me do this for my family." It was more than a desire to shop. It was a need to reclaim a piece of her identity that arthritis and distance had stolen. It was a silent scream against the cage of her own body, a defiant act to prove that the provider within her was not yet extinct. Namdi, untangling himself from the lights, came over. "Mama, it's not safe. Let me go later, or Igioma can." "And leave the cooking? Or the lights?" "No." She cut him off, her gaze steely. "This is something I can do. Will you deny me this? To contribute to my own grandson's Christmas table?" She used the old term grandson unconsciously, a slip into the deep groove of her original hope, which now simply meant family. Her words, laced with a vulnerability they all heard beneath the steel, hung in the air. It wasn't about the tomatoes. It was about dignity. It was about the Christmas Eve urge to be, once more, the engine and not the passenger. Namdi and Igioma exchanged a look, a silent conversation of worry, understanding, and reluctant surrender. They saw not just a stubborn old woman, but a warrior trying to lift a sword that had grown too heavy. To refuse her would be to wound her spirit more deeply than any arthritis ever could. The silence stretched, filled only by the thump-thump of the pestle from the kitchen. Finally, Namdi sighed, a sound of love overruling fear. "Okay, Mama," he said softly, "but I will take you in the car. And you will call a taxi from Brother Johnson's park immediately you are done. No walking. Promise me." A triumphant, relieved light sparked in Chinyer's eyes. She had won. She was going to the market. She nodded, the promise easy to make in her moment of victory. "I promise. Just take me there." As Namdi helped her gather her purse and her walking stick, Chinyer stood a little taller. The Christmas Eve urge was satisfied, the restless spirit quieted. She was going to war, not with spear and shield, but with a shopping list and a determined heart, ready to bring home the feast. She did not see the shadow of dread that passed between her son and his wife as they watched her prepare, a shadow as silent and persistent as the harmattan wind. Pride before the fall. The drive to Mile 1 Market was a short, tense journey through streets already thick with festive desperation. Namdi navigated the clogged roads, his knuckles pale on the steering wheel. Beside him, Chinyer sat ramrod straight, her gaze fixed ahead as if on a battlefield. Her good hand, the one not curled around her walking stick, clutched her woven shopping bag like a shield. "Mama," Namdi began, for the 5th time, his voice carefully neutral. "Remember, go straight to the section for tomatoes and peppers. It is less crowded there near the entrance. Get what is on the list, nothing more. Do not let anyone pressure you. Namdi, who is the child here? Chinyur replied, her tone dry but not unkind. Did I not barter for a goat at the poor market when you were still sucking thumb? A market is a market. I know its language. This is not Nkpor, Mama. This is Port Harcourt on Christmas Eve. It is a different beast. He pulled the car to a shuddering halt at the edge of the market road, a seething river of humanity, carts, and honking minibuses before them. The noise hit them like a wall, a cacophony of shouted prices, bleating goats, blaring music, and 1,000 simultaneous conversations. The air was a potent stew of diesel fumes, ripe fruit, dried fish, and sweat. Chinyur's confident expression faltered for a single, telling second. The scale of it was overwhelming. But pride was a powerful fuel. She squared her shoulders. This is fine. I am fine. Namdi got out, hurried around, and helped her alight. He held her elbow firmly. Feeling the tremble, she tried to suppress. Mama, Biko, listen. Buy the things and walk, slowly, to Brother Johnson's taxi park. It is right there, you see the blue sign? Do not try to carry anything. Hire a wheelbarrow boy immediately. Give him the goods, and have him walk with you to the taxi. Pay him well. Then come straight home. His eyes searched hers, pleading. Promise me. No detours. No visiting. She patted his hand, her impatience returning. I have heard you, my son. I am not deaf. Go and fix your lights. I will be back before the water for the yam boils. She offered a brave, tight smile, then turned, planting her walking stick firmly on the uneven ground, and began to merge into the swirling current of the crowd. Namdi stood watching, a rock of anxiety in the human stream. He saw her head tie, a bright splash of gold and green, bob for a few moments as she navigated between two arguing women with baskets of live chickens. Then it disappeared, swallowed by the market's hungry chaos. Back in the quiet of the car, the silence was deafening. The fear he had kept at bay now flooded in. He saw every stumble she had ever hidden, every wince she had swallowed. He saw her stiff, painful gait trying to match the frantic pace around her. He had let his prideful, aging mother walk into a jungle because he could not bear to break her spirit. The love in that decision felt thin and foolish against the sharp terror he now felt. He should have said no. He should have, as her son, been firm. But he had seen the light in her eyes, the light of being useful, of being needed, and he had capitulated. It was pride on both their parts, hers to prove she could still provide, his to prove he respected her enough to let her try. He didn't drive away. Instead, he pulled the car into a semi-legal spot, killed the engine, and decided to wait. He would give her an hour, just an hour. Then he would go in and find her. He stared at the blue sign of the taxi park, a promised sanctuary that now seemed a continent away. The minutes ticked by with the sluggishness of dripping glue, each one stretching his nerves tighter. The triumphant image of her returning, laden with packages and beaming, began to fray at the edges, replaced by darker, fleeting visions of her lost, or overwhelmed, or worse. Inside the market, Chinyur was a soldier in a war she was no longer equipped to fight. The language was familiar, but the terrain was brutal. Bodies jostled her. A young boy with a tray of eggs strapped to his head brushed past, making her stumble. The cacophony was a physical pressure. She found the tomato seller, her voice surprisingly steady as she haggled, the familiar ritual a momentary anchor. She moved to the pepper woman, then the onion stall. Each purchase was a victory, but each step was a conquest over fire in her knees. She hired a lanky wheelbarrow pusher, a boy who couldn't be more than 16. Auntie, you don't tire? Make I find you taxi now? He asked, his eyes kind. Soon, my Pekin, soon, she breathed, her chest tight. Just the fish now. Then we go. But the fish section was deeper in, down a narrow, slippery aisle. It was the final stretch, and her pride demanded she finish the list. She took a step, then another, her stick slipping on a discarded plantain peel. The world tilted, and Namdi, sitting in the silent car, knew nothing. He only knew the weight of his own pride and the growing, chilling certainty that he had made a terrible mistake. He watched the blue sign, willing her tired, proud figure to emerge from the crowd and walk towards it. But the market, vast and uncaring, held its secret close. Chaos at the market. The fish section of Mile 1 Market was a world unto itself, a damp, cacophonous cave of cement troughs and frantic commerce. The air here was a briny slap, thick with the smell of salt, scales, and blood from the butcher's stall next door. Ice, sawdust, and murky water slicked the ground. It was the final, most challenging leg of Chinyer's mission. Her woven bag now bulged with tomatoes and peppers. A small sack of onions nestled in the crook of her arm. The young wheelbarrow pusher, who had said his name was Monday, followed respectfully behind, his green wheelbarrow containing her other purchases. He watched her with concern, seeing how she leaned heavily on her stick, how her breath came in short, sharp puffs that clouded in the oddly cool air of the shaded alley. "Auntie, the fish seller's day for front," Monday said, raising his voice over the din, but ground slippery-o. "Make I go buy 'am for you? You tell me wedding you want." Chinyer shook her head, a stubborn set to her jaw. She had come this far. She would see the fish herself, press the flesh to test its freshness with her own thumb, choose the perfect silvery tilapia for the Christmas stew. To delegate now would be to admit defeat at the final gate. "I will see it myself," she declared and pressed forward. The narrow aisle was a logjam of humanity. Housewives with baskets shoved past. Burly market men shouted, "Fine fish. Come by." Water sloshed from overflowing troughs. Chinyer's world narrowed to the patch of treacherous ground in front of her feet and the rhythmic, stabbing pain in her hips with each step. The festive noise became a roaring, disorienting wall of sound. The bright gold and green of her head tie, once a beacon, now just made her feel conspicuous, a slow-moving target in a rushing stream. She finally reached a relatively calm stall, its owner a large woman with a kind face. "Mama, welcome. You want fish? See this one, fresh like morning dew." Chinyer leaned her stick against the stall, allowing herself a moment's relief from its weight. She bent slightly, her joints screaming in protest, to inspect the gleaming catch. Her fingers, stiff with arthritis, fumbled as she tried to turn a fish over. The stall owner, noticing her struggle, gently lifted it for her. "This one's strong," the woman said. "Good for pepper soup." "Yes, this one," Chinyer managed, nodding. The transaction was quick. The fish, wrapped in old newspaper, was added to Monday's wheelbarrow. The mission was complete. A wave of intense fatigue, more profound than any she'd felt before, washed over her. It was a deep, cellular exhaustion that had little to do with sleep. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the market was receding, leaving behind the raw, unmediated reality of her pain. "Auntie, we done finish," Monday said, his voice gentle. "Taxi park day for back. Make we go." Chinyer nodded, unable to summon words. She turned, her movements slow and wooden. The crowded aisle seemed to stretch impossibly long. She reached for her walking stick, her grip unsure. As she pivoted on her stiff leg to begin the retreat, the sole of her plastic sandal met a patch of ground slick with fish guts and melted ice. There was no grace in the fall. It was a sudden, shocking collapse of will and bone. Her leg simply vanished from under her. She cried out, a short, sharp sound lost in the market's roar as she pitched sideways. There was no time to put her hands out. Her temple connected with the rough, wet edge of a cement trough with a sickening, dull thud. The world did not go black, but it shattered into 1,000 confusing pieces. Light fractured into blinding stars. Sound became a muffled, underwater roar. The sharp, specific pain in her knees was swallowed by a dizzying, overwhelming wave of nausea and disorientation. She lay on the cold, wet ground, the smell of blood and fish now intimately close, trying to remember where she was, what she was doing. "Auntie, Auntie." Monday's voice pierced the fog, filled with panic. He was kneeling beside her, his eyes wide with terror. "Kidu? You day okay? Your head day bleed." Chinyer tried to speak, to tell him she was fine, to get up and prove it. But her tongue was a thick, useless thing in her mouth. A warm trickle, distinct from the market filth, traced a path down her temple. The world kept tilting, the faces of gathered onlookers swimming above her like worried moons. "No, no hospital," she finally slurred, the words thick and slow. The thought of strange doctors, of explanations, of the shame of an ambulance, was worse than the pain. "My son, take me home." The ride of shame. Time became a liquid, slow and disorienting. Chinyer was aware of voices buzzing around her like agitated flies, of rough hands helping her to sit up, of the cold, damp seep of the ground through her wrapper. Monday's terrified face was the only thing in focus. Auntie, you day bleed for head. We go carry you go hospital. His voice cracked with adolescent fear. No. The word emerged from her with more force than she thought she possessed, a command from the depths of her pride. The very idea was unthinkable. To be laid out in a public ward on Christmas Eve, to become a problem, a story, old woman fell in the market. To have Namdi and Igioma see her that way, it was a humiliation worse than death. Home, my son's house. Adelaide Street, number 15, Blue Gate. She tried to stand, to show him she could, but her legs were water, her head a spinning top. She slumped back, a groan escaping her lips. The small crowd that had gathered began to offer conflicting advice. Call police. Take him to chemist. Make her family know. Monday looked from the bleeding, disoriented woman to the crowd, his mind racing. He was just a boy from the Riverine community, trying to earn his daily bread. If he took her to a hospital, they might accuse him. They might demand money he didn't have. If he left her, she might die, and his conscience would never recover. His panicked eyes fell on his wheelbarrow, now emptied of its goods. It was an ugly solution, a cruel-looking solution, but it was the only vehicle he had. Auntie, I go carry you for Wheelbarrow, he said, his voice low and shamed. I go push you go your house. I no get motor. Shame burned through Chinyer's dizziness, hot and acrid. A wheelbarrow? To be paraded through the streets like a sack of cassava? She, Chinyer, who commanded respect in her village. But the alternative, lying here, waiting for official help, becoming a spectacle, was worse. The need to get home, to the safety of her son's walls, overrode every other consideration. She gave a single, slight, agonized nod. With the help of a sympathetic market woman, Monday carefully, awkwardly, lifted Chinyer. She was a dead weight, her body refusing to cooperate. He half-lifted, half-folded her into the metal basin of the wheelbarrow, arranging her as gently as he could. Her legs dangled over the edge, her head lolled back against the sack of onions. She closed her eyes, not from unconsciousness, but from a profound need to shut out the world, to make the seeing eyes of Port Harcourt disappear. The journey was a pilgrimage of pain and mortification. Every cobblestone, every pothole Monday tried to avoid, sent a jolt through her battered body. The wheelbarrow's single wheel squeaked a loud, rhythmic complaint. She kept her eyes shut tight, but she could feel the stairs. She heard the sudden silences as they passed, followed by the low murmurs. What'd happen to the mama? Nah, so old people day suffer. Chai, see shame. Tears of pure humiliation mixed with the dried blood on her temple. This was the ultimate undoing of all her pride. She had left the house a provider, a matriarch on a mission. She was returning as cargo, broken and exposed, in a pauper's cart. The Christmas Eve urge that had felt so noble now tasted like ashes in her mouth. She had wanted to contribute, and instead, she had become the ultimate burden, a spectacle being wheeled to her son's doorstep. Monday pushed on, his own face burning with effort and anxiety. He whispered apologies with every jolt. Sorry, Auntie rode bad, sorry. He followed her slurred, intermittent directions, turning left, then right, his muscles screaming. All he wanted was to deliver her and flee, to erase himself from this terrible scene. Finally, through the narrow slits of her eyes, Chinyer saw the familiar corrugated iron roofs of Adelaide Street. The Blue Gate, her sanctuary, came into view. It looked impossibly far away, a symbol of a normalcy she had shattered. Not here? Monday asked, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Yes, she whispered. That one, number 15. He pushed the wheelbarrow right up to the front step, the metal rim clinking against the concrete. The normal, festive sounds of the house, faint music, the thump of pestle on mortar, drifted out. They sounded like sounds from another life. With a final, straining effort, Monday helped her sit up slightly in the cart, propping her against the sacks. She looked frail, disheveled, her fine head tie askew, her eyes glazed with pain and shame. His duty done, a primal fear took over. He saw the nice house, the Blue Gate. These were important people. When they saw their mother like this, their anger would need a target. He would be that target. Without another word, he knocked on the gate. 3 loud, frantic raps, then turned and ran, his worn shoes slapping against the dusty road, disappearing around the corner before the echo of the knock had faded. Chinyer was alone, propped in the wheelbarrow like a discarded doll, stranded on the precipice of home. The squeak of the fleeing wheelbarrow faded, leaving only the mocking silence and the distant, cheerful sounds of a Christmas Eve she had hoped to perfect. She lacked the strength to call out. She could only wait, drowning in shame, for the door to open. The knock and flight. Inside the bungalow, time had taken on a different texture. It was thick with worry, each minute dragging like honey. Namdi had abandoned the Christmas lights, the tangled string now a snake coiled in defeat on the floor. He paced the short length of the sitting room, his footsteps a counter-rhythm to the relentless thump-thump-thump from the kitchen. But even Igioma's pounding had lost its confident vigor. It was now a nervous, frantic beat. She should have been back by now, Namdi said, for what felt like the 100th time, peering through the window at the empty street. The taxi park is a 5-minute drive, even with traffic. Maybe she met someone she knew, Igioma offered, but the hope in her voice was thin, brittle. A friend from the village. You know how she loves to talk. On Christmas Eve? In that madness. Namdi ran a hand over his face. The image of his mother's head tie disappearing into the crowd haunted him. He should never have let her go. The certainty was a cold stone in his gut. They had agreed not to alarm Adayabi, who was in a world of her own, constructing a sprawling city of blocks and her new toy animals in a corner of the room. The Christmas music still played from the radio, a cheerful soundtrack that now felt like a cruel mockery. Just as Namdi was reaching for his car keys, resolved to go and search, a sound cut through the domestic noises. Not the expected honk of a taxi, but 3 sharp, rapid knocks on the front gate. Rap, rap, rap. It was an urgent, impersonal sound. Not the call of a neighbor, not the polite tap of a visitor. Adayabi heard it first. Her head popped up from her block tower. Somebody knock. Mummy, she chirped, already scrambling to her feet before Igioma could stop her. Ada, wait. Igioma began, but the child was a streak of red Christmas dress, her small feet pattering across the polished cement floor. I will go see, Adayabi declared, her tiny hands reaching for the heavy bolt on the front door. She struggled with it for a second, her little tongue poking out in concentration, then managed to slide it back. She pulled the door open and stepped out into the shaded veranda, peering through the wrought iron gate into the bright afternoon sun. Namdi and Igioma were right behind her, their hearts in their throats. They expected to see a taxi driver, or a neighbor, or perhaps Chinyur herself, laden with bags, looking tired but triumphant. They did not expect the emptiness. The veranda was empty. The street in front of the gate was empty. No car, no person. But Adayabi was staring, her head tilted, her body perfectly still. She wasn't looking at the street. She was looking to the side, at the utility area next to the house, where Namdi kept his gardening tools and building materials. Mummy, Daddy, she said, her voice not scared, but filled with the pure, unadulterated curiosity of a child presented with a fascinating puzzle. Come see. Meanwhile, at the corner of the street, Monday pressed his back against the rough wall of a compound, his chest heaving. He heard no shouts, no screams of alarm from the blue-gated house. The silence was somehow worse. It meant they had found her. His part was over. He was a ghost now, a boy who had done a hard, ugly thing and then vanished. He wiped his sweaty face on his sleeve, whispered a prayer for the old woman, and then melted into the network of back alleys, leaving behind only the memory of 3 loud knocks and the squeak of a fleeing wheel. The cause of the knock had delivered its terrible message and fled, leaving the consequence to unfold without him. Come see. Adayabi stood frozen on the veranda, not with fear, but with the profound curiosity of a scientist who has discovered a new species. Her young mind, unburdened by concepts of disaster or shame, processed the scene before her with pure, observational logic. There was Daddy's big green wheelbarrow. It was usually filled with sand or dirt, a tool for work. But now it was a chair, and in the chair was Grandma. Grandma's eyes were closed, and she was leaning in a funny way, like her doll when its stitching came loose. Grandma's special Christmas head tie was crooked, and there was a little brown mark on her temple that looked like dried chocolate, but Adayabi knew it wasn't. The wheelbarrow was parked neatly, but Grandma was not sitting neatly. It was all wrong. Grandma sat in the armchair by the window, not in the wheelbarrow by the cement blocks. It was a problem that needed fixing, and for that, you needed grown-ups. She turned and dashed back into the house, colliding with her parents' legs as they rushed out behind her. Adaobi, what is it? Igioma's voice was tight. Who was at the gate? But Adaobi was already tugging at her father's trousers, her small face earnest. Daddy, come, come see. Nambi's anxiety was a live wire. See what, in WAM? Did someone run away? Not someone. Grandma. Adaobi insisted, her vocabulary failing to capture the surreal image. She pulled harder. She is sleeping outside. In your wheelbarrow. Come see. The words made no sense. They were a childish fantasy, a mixing of play and reality. Ada, Grandma is not outside, Igioma said gently, trying to peer past her to the empty street. She went to the market. No, she is back. Adaobi stamped her foot in frustration. The grown-ups weren't listening properly. She needed to be clearer. She released her father and ran back to the doorway, pointing a decisive finger toward the side of the house. There, in the wheelbarrow. She is sleeping there. Her eyes are closed. Come now. The specificity, the wheelbarrow, finally pierced the fog of their adult assumptions. A child might invent a visitor, but not the precise, bizarre location. A cold dread, colder than any they had felt all afternoon, seized both Namdi and Igioma simultaneously. They exchanged a single, horrified glance. Then they moved as one. Namdi swept past Adaobi, his long strides eating up the veranda. Igioma was right behind him, her hand flying to her mouth. Adaobi, satisfied she had finally been understood, trotted after them, ready to present her discovery. Namdi turned the corner, and the world stopped. The sight that met him was not just alarming. It was a violent dismantling of his entire understanding of his mother. His proud, regal mama, the woman who ruled from an armchair, was crumpled in a utilitarian metal bowl. Her stillness was not peaceful sleep. It was the terrifying stillness of defeat. The dried blood on her temple was a stark, brutal accusation against his own failure to protect her. A sound escaped him, a strangled mixture of a gasp and a sob. Mama! Behind him, Igioma cried out, Chinikim. Her hands, flour-dusted from the pounding, pressed against her chest, as if to keep her heart from breaking through. Adaobi, arriving at her father's side, looked up at their faces, then back at Grandma in the wheelbarrow. The adults' reactions were finally giving her discovery a new, scary context. This wasn't just a funny place for Grandma to sleep. This was a bad thing. But her work was done. She had seen. She had told. She had made them come see. Now, the grown-ups were in charge of the scary part. She reached out and silently took hold of the hem of her mother's wrapper, her wide eyes fixed on the shocking, silent tableau of her grandmother in the green metal cart. The rush to help. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, they were statues trapped in a nightmare. Namdi stared, his mind refusing to process the reality of his mother's form curled in the wheelbarrow. The green paint, chipped and stained from garden work, was a grotesque frame for her cherished lace. The world narrowed to that single, devastating image. It was the slight, pained flutter of Chinyur's eyelids that shattered the paralysis. A low moan escaped her lips, a sound of such profound distress that it catapulted Namdi into action. He lunged forward, falling to his knees on the rough concrete beside the wheelbarrow. His hands hovered over her, trembling, afraid to touch and cause more pain. Mama, Mama, what happened? Who did this to you? His voice was a ragged whisper, laced with a fury and fear that choked him. Chinyur's eyes opened halfway, glazed with confusion and shame. She focused on his face, and a tear welled and spilled over, cutting a clean path through the dust on her cheek. I fell, she slurred, the words thick and slow. At the market. My leg just left me. She tried to move, to sit up and reclaim some dignity, but a sharp gasp of pain stopped her. The boy. He helped. Do not blame him. He was scared. There was no time for the full story, for questions about mysterious boys. The blood, the disorientation, the terrifying vulnerability in her eyes. They all screamed of urgency. Igioma's maternal instincts, momentarily frozen by shock, now surged forward with a practical ferocity. Don't move her, Namdi. Her neck. She turned and sprinted back into the house, her wrapper flowing behind her. Adaobi, still clinging to the now empty fabric, stumbled and then stood alone, watching. Namdi gently, so gently, placed a stabilizing hand on his mother's shoulder. Don't try to move, Mama. We are here. We're taking you to the hospital. Everything will be fine. The words felt hollow, but he poured every ounce of his will into making them sound true. Igioma burst back out, car keys jangling in one hand, her purse and a clean, damp kitchen towel in the other. She thrust the purse at Namdi and, with a tenderness that belied her speed, began to dab at the wound on Chinyur's temple. It's not deep, she murmured, more to herself than anyone. But the head, we must go. Now, Nambi nodded. The logistics of lifting her from the deep, awkward basin of the wheelbarrow without hurting her further felt like an impossible equation. Mama, I am going to lift you. It will hurt. I am so sorry. With Igioma guiding and supporting from the other side, he slid his arms under his mother, one behind her back, the other under her knees. She was so light, a bundle of pain and brittle bones. As he lifted, she cried out, a short, sharp sound she instantly tried to swallow. It was the most terrible sound he had ever heard. He cradled her against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder, and rose to his feet. Adeabi, the car, Igioma commanded, her voice brooking no delay. She ran ahead to open the rear door of their old Volkswagen Beetle. Adeabi, released from her frozen watch, scrambled to obey. She knew the car. She ran to the passenger side, stretching on her tiptoes to grab the handle, pulling with all her 4-year-old might to swing the front door wide, clearing the path for her father. Nambi moved with a focused, careful speed, his mother a precious, broken cargo. He angled her through the door Igioma held open and laid her as flat as possible across the back seat. Igioma immediately climbed in beside her, cradling Chinyur's head in her lap, the clean towel now a pillow. Drive, Namdi. Gently, but drive. He slammed the door and ran to the driver's side. Adeabi was still standing there, her mission with the door complete, her eyes huge. In the frantic rush, they had almost forgotten her. Without a word, Namdi scooped her up, placed her in the front passenger seat, and fastened the seatbelt around her small, rigid body. The engine coughed to life. As he reversed out of the compound, Nambi's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. He saw his wife bent over his mother in the back, whispering soothing words. He saw the green wheelbarrow, now empty and sinister, sitting abandoned by the house. And he saw, imprinted on his soul, the sight of his daughter's small, solemn face staring straight ahead, a silent witness to the day Grandma came home in a wheelbarrow, and their world tilted off its axis. The car pulled onto the main road, moving with a tense, careful speed towards the hospital, leaving behind the unfinished yam, the tangled lights, and the cheerful music, all the trappings of a Christmas Eve that had suddenly, irrevocably, changed. The flickering fluorescent light. The General Hospital in Port Harcourt on Christmas Eve was a study in chaotic, understaffed compassion. The air in the casualty ward was thick with the antiseptic smell of hope and despair, undercut by the fainter, earthier sense of blood and sweat. A wailing child with a burn, a man clutching a bleeding hand wrapped in a rag, a pregnant woman breathing through contractions. They were a tapestry of urgent, mundane suffering. Into this scene, Namdi carried his mother, a different kind of casualty. Her silence amidst the groans was more alarming than any cry. Igioma, with Adeabi's small hand firmly clasped in hers, spoke to the harried nurse at the triage desk, her voice a forceful, desperate calm. My mother-in-law. She fell, hit her head. She is not speaking well. The words head injury acted like a key. Eyes widened, priorities shifted. They were ushered past the line of waiting patients, a privilege that felt like a condemnation of the severity of Chinyur's state. They were taken to a small, curtained cubicle where a single, flickering fluorescent light buzzed like an angry insect. A young doctor with tired eyes but gentle hands arrived. His examination was methodical, his touch clinical but not unkind. He shone a light into Chinyur's pupils, asked her simple questions. What is your name? What day is it? Frowning slightly at her slow, slurred responses. He cleaned the wound on her temple, the dried blood giving way to an angry, purple bruise. Namdi stood against the wall, feeling the rough, cold concrete through his shirt. He watched as his mother, the pillar of his life, submitted to being a patient. Each wince she suppressed, each confused blink, was a knife twist in his gut. Igioma stood on the other side of the narrow bed, holding Chinyur's hand, her thumb stroking the knuckles swollen from arthritis. Adeabi was a silent, watchful ghost in the corner, her back pressed against the cool wall. She had stopped asking questions. The scary car ride, the strange smells, the curtained-off space, the serious faces, it all told her this was a place for very bad things. Her eyes were fixed on her grandmother's face on the white pillow. Finally, the doctor straightened up. "She has a mild concussion," he announced, his voice cutting through the buzz of the light. "The skin shows no bleeding, thank God. But her body has been through a massive shock. The fall, the stress. Her blood pressure is very high." And, he added, his gaze softening as he looked at Chinyer's gnarled hands resting on the sheet, "her arthritis is severely inflamed. She must have been in considerable pain even before the fall." He turned to Namdi and Ijeoma. "We will keep her overnight for observation. She needs absolute rest. Complete quiet. No stress. Her body needs to recover from the trauma, and her mind needs to settle. The confusion should clear in a day or two." He paused, choosing his words. "She is not a young woman. A fall like this, it is a warning. Her bones are fragile. Her balance is not what it was. She cannot be taking risks." Each word was a verdict. Not a young woman. Fragile. Cannot be taking risks. They were facts Namdi had always known but had collectively, lovingly, chosen to work around. Now they were laid bare under the flickering hospital light, undeniable. As a nurse came to set up an intravenous drip, Chinyer's voice, thin and thread-like, rose from the bed. "I want to go home. I am not staying here." It was the ghost of her old defiance, but it had no strength. "You are staying, Mama," Namdi said, his own voice firm with a new resolve. It was not a suggestion. "You need to be here. We will be right outside." They were moved to a longer-term observation ward, a room with 6 beds. Chinyer was given a bed by the window. The sedative in the 4-drip began to pull her into a fitful sleep. The lines of pain and shame on her face slowly eased, leaving behind the vulnerable map of her years. Namdi pulled 2 plastic chairs close to the bed. He sat on one, and Ijeoma sank onto the other, pulling Adeobi into her lap. The child was asleep in moments, exhausted by fear and adrenaline. Under the sterile, humming silence of the hospital ward, the festive world felt a universe away. The only light was the moon through the window and the faint glow from the corridor. Namdi looked at his wife, her own face drawn with worry, and then at his sleeping mother and daughter. The wheelbarrow, the market, the fall, they were not just an accident. They were the violent, undeniable climax of a silent struggle. His mother's fierce independence had finally met the immovable object of her failing body. And he, in his desire to honor her spirit, had enabled the collision. He reached over and took Ijeoma's free hand. They didn't speak. No words were needed. The flickering fluorescent light in the first cubicle had illuminated more than Chinyer's wound. It had illuminated the precarious truth of their new reality. A line had been crossed. Things could not go back to the way they were. The Christmas of quiet understanding was over. A new, more difficult season of care was beginning, and its first lesson had been delivered in the harsh, buzzing light of a hospital on Christmas Eve. The new rhythm. The hospital discharged Chinyer on Boxing Day morning. The bruise on her temple had bloomed into a spectacular palette of violet and yellow, a stark banner of her ordeal. The confusion had cleared, replaced by a heavy, persistent weariness and a grimace that flashed across her face with every step. The doctor's final words to Namdi and Ijeoma were simple: no strain. Absolute rest. Her body is asking for a ceasefire. You must enforce it. The return home was a somber procession. The cheerful Christmas decorations they'd put up now seemed to mock them. The pot of pounded yam sat untouched in the fridge, a relic of a celebration that never happened. The air in the bungalow was different, charged with an unspoken tension and the faint, medicinal scent of the hospital. Chinyer was installed in her armchair like a fragile artifact, a blanket over her lap despite the heat. Her spirit was subdued, the fire of her pride banked by humiliation and physical defeat. She looked out the window, her eyes avoiding the corner of the house where the wheelbarrow still sat. For 2 days, a brittle silence reigned. Ijeoma served her meals on a tray. Namdi adjusted her pillows. Adeobi would bring her toys and lay them quietly on the arm of the chair, sensing the delicate atmosphere. The unspoken question hung in the air. What now? On the 3rd morning, Chinyer broke the silence. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I need to go to the market tomorrow. There is no fresh pepper. The soup is tasteless. Ijeoma, who was sweeping, froze. Nambi looked up from the newspaper he wasn't reading. Mama, he said, his voice gentle but with a new, unyielding bedrock beneath it. No, you are not going to the market. Chinyer's eyes, still shadowed by the bruise, flashed with a hint of her old defiance. So I will sit here until I become a mushroom? I am not an invalid. I hate this sitting, this waiting. We know, Mama, Ijeoma said, putting down the broom and coming to kneel by the chair. She took Chinyer's hand, feeling the familiar, swollen joints. We know you hate it. But the market, it is not a battle you can fight anymore. Not like that. Then how will we eat? Will you starve me to keep me safe? The challenge was there, edged with frustration. This was the moment they had been circling since the hospital. Nambi took a deep breath. We have thought about that, Mama. We are not going to starve. And you are not going to be a prisoner. He leaned forward. We are going to hire someone. A helper. Chinyer scoffed. To do what? Watch me breathe. No. Ijeoma said, her idea taking shape as she spoke. To be your ambassador. Your legs. A young girl from the church, Mercy. She is strong. She is smart. She will go to the market. But she will go with your list. She will come back and show you every tomato, every fish, and you will tell her if it is good. You will set the prices in your head. You will direct the kitchen from here. You will teach her your recipes. You will be the general, Mama. But you will command from the headquarters, not from the front line where the bullets are flying. The idea hung in the air. Chinyer stared at them, the resistance in her face slowly giving way to a dawning, cautious consideration. It was not surrender. It was a strategic redeployment. Mercy arrived the next day, a cheerful, robust girl of 18 with a ready smile and respectful eyes. Chinyer regarded her with a hawk's gaze. She dictated a meticulous list. When Mercy returned, Chinyer inspected every single purchase, criticizing the size of the peppers but secretly pleased with the freshness of the fish. She directed Mercy through the making of the soup, her voice gaining strength as she barked orders about when to add the augury. It was not perfect. There were days Chinyer chafed at the confinement, when she insisted Mercy take her for a short walk that ended after 3 minutes on a bench in the compound, both of them sitting in silent companionship, watching the world go by. But a new rhythm was born. Chinyer's mind was engaged, her expertise utilized. Her dignity was preserved not through perilous independence, but through respected command. The wheelbarrow was finally moved, cleaned, and returned to its mundane use. But its story was now woven into the fabric of their family. It was no longer just a tool. It was a monument to a turning point. One evening, as Mercy washed the dishes and Namdi helped his mother to her room, Adeobi climbed into Ijeoma's lap. Mummy, she said, her voice thoughtful. Grandma doesn't ride in the wheelbarrow anymore. No, my love, Ijeoma said, holding her close. She doesn't need to. We all help to carry her now, in different ways. Adeobi nodded, as if this made perfect sense. And in a way it did. The crisis had forged a new covenant. They had learned to see Chinyer not as the invincible matriarch or a fragile burden, but as the proud, aching heart of their family, a heart they would now collectively protect. The December visits would continue, but the unspoken strain was gone, replaced by a hard-won peace. They had found a way to let her lead, while ensuring she would never have to walk alone into battle again. The new rhythm was one of shared strength, a quieter, deeper harmony that finally kept everyone safe. Thank you so much for following the journey of Namdi, Ijeoma, Adeobi, and Grandma Chinyer. If this story of family, resilience, and love touched your heart, please share it with someone who would appreciate it. Subscribe for more heartfelt Nigerian stories that explore the beautiful, complex tapestry of our lives, our families, and our unbreakable spirit. Leave a comment below. We'd love to know which moment resonated with you the most. Until the next story, stay blessed and hold your loved ones close.